simpler you can make your product and focus it on the core that you're trying to deliver, the core value you're trying to deliver to your users, much better off you'll be in both building and shipping because you have less work to do, and validating that work because there's less to distract customers and more that you can focus on as far as how are they actually using the product, because you can track fewer things more easily than you can track more. So how do you decide which features to add? Let's look at 6 different considerations, and we'll do these one by one here. The first question we ask is, does the feature add clarity to the core purpose of the product? So again, you've tried to figure out through your MVP if there's a market need for something. You'll use Buffer as an example. They wanted to be able to schedule tweets in a way that if I throw a bunch of stuff at Twitter, it's not all going out in the same 5 or 10 minute interval. It's being spread across maybe 1 or 2 days. That way I'm not inundating people or putting all of my social media efforts into a moment in time that's so finite. So anything that they would add to that, any new feature that they should add to that, should increase the value of that problem that they're solving. So for example, right now Buffer has a system where you pick, for each social network, you pick a series of times. So you may say, on Twitter, I want to post at 9 in the morning, at 11:30 in the afternoon, or in the morning, and at 4:30 in the afternoon. Those are my 3 times when I'll post. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't auto-post based on the likelihood that your followers are going to be online during a particular period. So if they had a feature that they could add to the system that would say, hey, based on your followers, more people seem to be interacting with Twitter from 4 to 6 rather than from 9 in the morning until 11:30 in the morning, then you may want to change your tweets to be later in the afternoon. That would be a great feature to add clarity to Buffer's proposition of posting to social media. Let's move on then to the next item. Will the feature delight your users, adding unexpected value? So there was a great example from Alona's talk where she said there's so much work that has to be done by your product. And the question is, how much of that is put on your users versus how much the system can handle? And this is a good example, and I'll actually show a specific example in a minute here, that adding unexpected value is either taking work away from the user or doing something unexpected for them that with the interface or the interaction or the information that you provide to them that brings them value. Another consideration is, will the feature be used often? Especially when you're trying to limit or you have limited resources, which enterprise through to a new startup all has limited resources. Are you building a feature that is not going to get used or is only going to get used by a select few, which is distracting you from delivering a lot more value based on focusing on that core value you're trying to provide to your users? And will the feature be difficult to ship? Is it a difficult engineering feat? Is it going to be difficult to deliver it to market? All of those considerations around actually practically executing on this obviously have to come into play as well. And will users understand the feature? So not necessarily is it just intuitive, but does it connect with the value proposition as well, so that when you add something into the product, it's going to be easily understood how to use it. And then questions of, do new users have to be educated? Do existing users have to be educated? And how difficult is that going to be? Because the more difficult it is to get up to speed on a product, the less value there is potentially, and the more difficult it will be for you to actually engage users to try that feature. Finally, will users talk about the feature? Are you providing something that has enough of a level of engagement and interest and value that they're driving back that a user may talk to a friend about it, share it on Twitter, whatever it may be? So here's an example when we talk about the idea of delivering value. We talk about the idea of how much effort for the user versus how much the system is taking control and providing value back. Let's take a look at Runkeeper. So when you launch Runkeeper, you are pre-selected in a type of activity, which you then have to change that selection to get started. So if I'm on bicycle, I'm going to have to click and say, no, today I'm running. So I make that selection, and now I have to go and hit the Go Running button to get started. Once I hit that, I'm then being tracked. So now that I'm being tracked, I'm going to go out on my run. Unfortunately, this was a terrible run, which is what happens in February. And by the time I'm finished, in order to qualify that run, I have to hit the stop button. Once I hit the stop button, I have to hit another button that says, yes, I'm done. And once I hit that, I get a screen that asks me if I want to share it, if it's got a summary, and I have to hit the save button. So I'm multiple clicks in to track my run, regardless of how terrible and how short it was. Now, compare that to this product. Let's look at Moves. With Moves, I open it up, I have my data. I didn't tell it what I was doing. It knows that I ran, it knows that I cycled, it knows that I walked. That's automatically being tracked in the background by the system. There's no user input whatsoever. And it also shows me the intervals of when I did these things. And where I went. I have set that I have a home and I have an office and so on, so it knows those places, but at the very least it shows me where I went and what neighborhood and what actually I can click on each of those items and see on a map where I was. But there is no effort on my part. So from a approximately 6-click process in Runkeeper for every single activity, this is tracked not just 3 different activities, but multiple instances of them in one day without me doing anything. That's pretty amazing. So let's look at product market fit. Mark Anderson has this great quote. Product market fit means being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. So again, we talked about the idea of the MVP is to test your idea, to test your business plan or goal. And with those different tactics that we talked about with the concierge MVP and landing pages and so on, your goal there is to figure out if there's even a market that's willing to pay for your product. And then you have to worry about putting a product into the market that will actually deliver on that opportunity. So getting back to the idea of the user-centered design, and in this case, user-centered market discovery, there's a local construction app now operating out of Waterloo called Bridget. Before they even thought about product, they knew that they wanted to serve the construction industry. They had experience there. So they were very tapped into that industry. But what they wanted to know is what is the product we can bring to market right now that's not only going to make a difference, but it's going to get us sales. They did over 500 interviews going to various construction sites, talking to the people on the ground, saying, what is it that makes your life most difficult, and how can we help automate a process and share information with you in real time that's going to help you do your job better. And they've now ended up with a product, this brand new product, relatively new product, I guess. They've got over 1,000 users in Southern Ontario, which has been their focus. And they're delivering a very specific solution based on those interviews, rather than just throwing an idea out there, a product out there that maybe doesn't serve a specific need. Another example here about testing assumptions is Zappos. When Zappos started, I don't know how many people are familiar with Zappos here? Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, so they're predominantly U.S., but they were a pretty adored online shoe sales company for years, predominantly out of the U.S., and then they got bought by Amazon for a godforsaken amount of money, I'm sure. But when they started, the idea was people will buy shoes online, which maybe seems a little bit crazy. Things don't fit. What do? They dealt with that with return policies and great customer service and so on, and that's why they were so beloved. But they still didn't know. So they didn't go out and spend $100,000 or even grab an open source shopping cart system or hop on Shopify and spend $5,000 building a store that was then backed by a massive distribution and inventory network. What they did is they took the quick route of building a bare bones store, but they had zero inventory. And what the founder did is he went to local shoe merchants in his hometown and said, okay, can I take photos of your products, put them on my website, and when people buy from me, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to buy at retail price. So he's not making any money. But what he's trying to do is figure out if people will actually buy shoes. And through that validation process, he was able to determine that there's a massive market opportunity here, which they were able to capture. And that's the important thing to understand about the idea of the concierge MVP or any kind of conversations, interviews. Doing 500 interviews is no small amount of time. But the important thing to understand is that you need this customer feedback. You need to validate your ideas directly with the user. And that's where I mentioned before, high touch. You're going to spend a lot of time interacting with your customers, with your users, and you're going to gain so much insight from that process that there's huge value there, but it's an effort that you have to be willing to undertake or you're going to miss that opportunity. And this drives that point home from Steve Blank. In a startup, no facts exist inside the building, only opinions. Everything that you think you know about the product you're working on is an assumption. And you need to prove that against the market. And as I said before, even if you're part of a market, you have a very specific, and more so, you have very specific prejudices about your own problems that don't necessarily equate to the larger market insights that you can get. So we'll look back at Dropbox here. There's a great slide deck that they released a few years into their business. Drew Houston presented this, and this is one page from the slide deck that talks about his lessons learned. And he says the biggest risk is that you will build something or make something that nobody will want. Huge, like multiple billions of dollars probably annually are spent on building stuff that nobody wants. And this is why we have the rise of the MVP. Not launching, not shipping is difficult, but if you're not learning, you're dead. So this gets back to the point where you've got all of these assumptions that you're trying to serve, but that doesn't necessarily serve the market who's going to pay you and build your business. So you need to learn from that market by having interactions with users. Put something in the hands of users. Doesn't have to be code. Get real feedback ASAP. And then know where your target audience hangs out and speak to them in an authentic way, which is sometimes a difficult thing, but a good example goes back to Bridget, where they knew they wanted to serve the construction industry, so they went to construction sites. Not all of this should happen online, depending on the market you're trying to get into. The wash and fold concierge service is a good example. You don't find clothes online, you find them in people's houses. So you've got to find the market and be able to have an authentic conversation with them. Ultimately, you need to deliver an experience. And this is where, I mentioned this before, you've defined the core user need of your product. What is that one problem that your user can't live without that's going to solve a problem for them and deliver value on an ongoing basis? So you make a product that meets just that need in a delightful way. And let's get back to Buffer here. I wanted to take the scheduling feature of many Twitter clients and apps and make that single feature awesome. And he's talking a lot about features there, but this is a great blog post. You can find it online or ask me for the link of him talking about basically the first 7 weeks of Buffer was him trying to validate whether there was a market for this product. And the point is, he was framing that in the idea of experience where he says, I get up in the morning and I spend an hour reading tech blogs and I post half dozen tweets. And with traditional tools out there, I'm posting them all a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes apart. It's not a lot of value for me of getting noticed if everything's clumped together. So the experience there was to not inundate his followers with a bunch of links at the same time, and also to provide him with a little bit more value by sharing his content over time. So really, he was thinking in terms of benefits, not features. And let's look at the example then of the market he was entering into. Tons of Twitter clients out there. But the problem he was trying to solve was very, very specific. Is there a market for it? He found out that there was. And part of that is, if you look at one of the prominent Twitter platforms out there for managing accounts, this is the interface. And this interface is the same scale as the Buffer interface I'm about to show you. But you can see this does way more than what Buffer does. This is really a monitoring and replying and adding content interface. So it's the kitchen sink. But if you actually want to post a tweet, you start on this screen. This is your landing page when you log in and get to the dashboard. You've got to click the field at the top that opens up this dialog, which lists a bunch of accounts, none of which are selected, so you can't actually send a tweet yet. You have to select the account or accounts you want to send to. Then you've got to type your message. Then if you want to automatically schedule it, you have to hit the schedule button so it doesn't go out right away and you don't send 6 tweets at once if you're doing this in rapid succession. Now it's asking you to pick all of this information about when and what time, but there's an auto-schedule button there, so you can click the auto-schedule button. And then at that point, you've done 4 clicks and you still have to type your message and okay, great, it's going to be automated. Jump to Buffer. This is their dashboard. Your accounts are selected. You can turn them on or off. You're already auto-scheduled because that's what this tool does. You just type your message and you hit send. That's the simplicity of solving one problem. The other point is that features are a distraction from defining and measuring experience. So I mentioned this earlier, that the more that you throw into a system, the harder it is to actually provide value. And the reason is that your users do get confused. You have to be a power user to use Hootsuite. You have to really take your time to understand that interface. Nobody has to be a power user to use Buffer. So that's the distraction component. And then the other consideration is that if you're trying to measure the value of a feature within a product, when you have 16 other features distracting from that, it's going to be very hard to understand how users are prioritizing and how you design to prioritize use. There's just more stuff to consider, more distractions, and it makes it much more difficult to measure. So the point is to do less better. Brandon Schauer of Adaptive Path, he came up with this concept of the cupcake versus the dry cake model. And this is an example of a pretty good MVP. It's not the world's greatest wedding cake, but you can get this to one user and find out, does it look good, does it taste good, and texture, flavors, all the subtlety of it. So perhaps you want to think big. You do want to be able to make this guy, but start small. And the idea behind the cupcake versus dry cake model is, from an engineering point of view, the way to make this is to build the layers. You start with the big base cake, and then however they form that guy, you make those little cakes, and then you put all the fixings on it. But why on earth, oh boy. Yeah, well, this is where you end up if you go that route. Because you haven't perfected the craft. You haven't gone to the users and figured out, does it taste good? Does it look good? And it's not easy to deliver a product of that scale to market. And the point is, don't start here because this is not an MVP. This is a minimum product, but it's not a viable product because no user is going to want that unless they're desperately hungry. And I don't know what to say about this. So the point is, experience every step of the way. If you're trying to build the big cake, don't build the small plain cake or the big plain cake first. Don't start with a wheel to try to get to a car. Experience every step of the way. Start with something that works at a small scale, delivers value at a small scale with every iteration that you put out, and keep the core value that you're delivering to your customer in mind. I've got a great example of an MVP, which is, or at least a first product to market, which is really complicated, perhaps from an engineering point of view, but what they did to get this to market, I guarantee you, saved them probably 3 to 6 months. So I don't know if you guys know Hyperlapse. It's an Instagram product that you can get only on iPhone right now. And what it does is it lets you film a moving target or you move and film. And it does image stabilization, which it talks about in this simple 3-step process. Then you set how quickly you roll through your video. So you can set it at 1 time, so it's just a regular video, but you can go up to as high as 40 times the speed. So you could go cycling for 10 kilometers, mount the iPhone on the front of your bike, and you'd have a tour of Toronto. And you can accelerate that so that it only takes 3.5 minutes. And the image stabilization makes that viable. So that's the tough engineering part. But as far as getting to market, this is the product. You record, you set your speed, and it saves to your camera roll. And then you have the option to share it to Facebook or Instagram. But let's look at this in more detail. There are no user accounts. There's no video editor. There's no file management. It's iOS only. Those are certainly the first 3. I think most people who had a product idea who would come to any of us as practitioners, or if you're looking to bring a product to market, it's very unintuitive to say, I'm going to ship a product that doesn't have user accounts. It's very unintuitive to say, I'm going to do a video product, but I'm not going to give the users any control over that video other than speed. There's no cropping, there's no trimming of the duration of the video, none of that. And there's no file manager. So what they do is they allow you to save directly to your camera roll. So you have to provide access to your microphone, you have to provide access to your camera, and provide access to your photo library so that once it goes through its process, it's automatically saved. Part of that means it's automatically done. You're not fiddling with a file manager. So again, if you're trying to figure out how to get a product to market and deliver value, dealing with a file manager could be complex. It certainly adds more engineering time, and as discussed before, that means more support and more QA and more design work as well. So the point is that deliver something simple but magical. The magic, in this case, is the image stabilization. But let's also look at the fact that this goes beyond product. All of the marketing and the initial onboarding process for hyperlapse is also magical. So let's take a look at that. So it's a quick intro running through the capabilities of the product as you flick through. Take the video, stabilize the video, share it, and then you get a simple screen that says, hey, in order to do this, we need to be able to record. Please give us access. But there's always something happening on screen that's showing that one single value, which is we're going to build a really fun video. And then there's just a quick tutorial once you get into it. And then once you're done, this is it. Your next step from recording video is this screen. It's already been saved to your camera roll. And should you choose to do so, you can share. And they didn't even build a custom share widget. They just use what's built into iOS, because why spend time building something and reinventing something? So here's another product that is something that we worked on that was an interesting challenge, because the customer came to us with a bunch of data. And what this product does is it gives you a daily health forecast based on particular conditions that you may have. So in this case, highlighted here on the screen is your general health on the left with the man, whether or not you may get migraines, and whether or not you have asthma. And what the app does with the data is it tells you whether or not today you're more likely to have an outbreak, more or less likely to have an outbreak of this condition that you have. What came to us from the client was really a view into the data. And this was their kind of screen that you get every day when you wake up. So there are a bunch of colors on screen. And obviously this is a rudimentary wireframe, but the point is we had 2 different screens here. There's your week and colors signifying a degree of potential health issues that you may have. Of course, your list of conditions. And then when you click on any of those list of conditions, you get today's forecast. So, you know, there are all sorts of questions to ask about this. Is a weekly forecast important to you when you wake up in the morning, or is a daily forecast important? And then what does all of this information mean? Because this is just, they basically just say, we have this data and we're going to spit it out on a screen. Pardon me. So, our effort was to figure out, first and foremost, what is the final information that we need to share? So instead of just having a color, we've got a scale that we've included. We have labeled the scale, so this actually inappropriately says elevated. It's supposed to be not too bad today because it's nice and blue. But the point is that there's some kind of a scale that's been associated that is explicit rather than just color. And we've also defined what you can expect. Lower air quality may affect your conditions, risk of asthma or migraine. And the other thing was, this is a data-driven project, so they were pushing information to people in their initial wireframes, but the more information they gather from people, the better the data gets. So we have a quick, how are you feeling, down at the bottom. And then we scroll up and see the 5-day forecast, if people want that, because really it's about managing your day-to-day, not trying to decipher a very complicated grid of different conditions. So that kind of highlights some of the considerations around a business that you're working with that has some kind of information or data that they need to bubble to the surface of a user interface, and how you're going to present that information to the user in a way that is actionable for them and provides value to them. But ultimately, there was a lot of personal information that needed to be derived there. You needed to be willing to provide your information about your health. Very personal stuff. So how do we get there? And we looked at Hyperlapse's onboarding. So I'll just do a quick run through of Wellcast. So first we give them a teaser of what they're going to get. And the main thing is you have to start by setting a location, because everything is based on environmental data and the conditions that you have. Unfortunately, we have to have a health disclaimer. So there's no way around that. Now, we slowly ask people more and more personal information. So we start with the conditions, saying basically we're going to provide you a report based on these conditions. So select a couple, and then we get into the most personal information. And this is not mandatory. So we said, hey, if you provide this information, we'll be able to provide a more accurate Wellcast. So please feel free to pass that on. And then finally, we create your personal Wellcast, and there's your screen. So I think certainly Ilona talked about the idea of the holistic concept of experience. It goes way beyond the product. So I'm focusing a lot on the product here, and I'm not going to go off, especially with only 3 minutes left, into the experience side of things. But customer support, marketing, your users' expectations, all of these things affect your experience, because prejudices and assumptions and goals are coming to the table with each user. Each individual user has their own set of expectations. So it's important to consider all of these aspects when you're working on a product, especially if you're trying to manage or have insight into the experience. Don't just stop with the product. I just did 2 days in a call center for a client earlier this week. 2 hours in a call center, because that customer who's calling in is using the interface that we're working on, and hearing from them what type of information they're having trouble with from a language point of view, what type of information they're having trouble with from an input point of view and selection point of view, all of that is incredibly valuable. So experience is ultimately the sum of so many parts. I'm going to try to escalate this a little bit. Your product's purpose, we've talked about. The value to your users, the ease of use, which gets into so many considerations as well. Ease of use can be onboarding, its general interface. It can depend, again, on the expectations of people coming into the product through your marketing channels. Interactivity, consistency as well. How does it function compared to other tools they're used to in the market? And how does it function as they move through your product? You don't want to be throwing people, different interactions and different labeling and different language and so on. Your product needs to be consistent through and through. And you have to have personality. The idea that you engineer and throw a product out there and it is what it is completely the antithesis of experience design, where you're considering all of these different touch points. And by putting personality into the product through the language, through the design, through the visuals, and so on, you start to make a connection with people. And Fake Grimlock has a great quote: "Personality make product friend. You help friend. You forgive when friend not perfect." This is important because when we're doing things like MVPs and we're trying things out, we will stumble and we will make mistakes. And if you have a connection with the user that's more than just bits of your product, then you can have this dialogue and they will absolutely forgive you and help you make the product better. So, where's my time captain? 0, I know. So I should just shut up? There's my time captain over there. Great. Okay, well, you know what? That's good. I'll just leave with this. Whoops, not that. Make your MVP an exceptional experience. And somewhere, yes, there we go.